In World War II, American tank crews were often outgunned by superior German panzers.
The Panzer unit could pick us off like flies.
But what the GIs lacked in firepower, they made up for with risky tactics and a lot of guts.
Throughout the whole war, we were outgunned and out-armored.
We'll take you behind the scenes of Fury and inside the tanker's world.
Fire! On the line!
As filmmakers bring to life the brutal onslaught of the Nazi war machine and resurrect the last running Tiger tank in the world. Just how close can Hollywood come to capturing the realities of armored warfare? Feel the steel. Next on Tanks of Fury. The film Fury, released in 2014 by Columbia Pictures, follows an American tank crew struggling to survive the final weeks of the Second World War.
Fury takes place in April 1945. The American military is fighting in the heart of Nazi Germany, and this dying fanatical regime is doing everything it can to stop them.
Of Fury's 5-man crew, 4 have been together since the beginning of the war.
The boss of the tank, the king of the tank, is War Daddy. It's his tank and it's his crew. His struggle is between completing the mission and keeping his men alive.
His boys have to trust him, and he has to trust himself, because those calls are going to determine who walks away and who doesn't.
Bible is the gunner. Kunas is the ammunition handler and loader. And the driver is Gordo.
Now you have this tank crew of these 4 veterans, and they get a replacement, and it's a new kid.
What's your name?
Norman.
He has to learn how to bond with the crew, learn his job, and he has 1 day to do it.
Do as you're told. Don't get too close to anyone.
It's the story of a family in a tank. It's these 5 brothers who face the horrors of war together.
But what's the inside story? Is the war of Fury's tankers the war of real tankers? Fury's crew represents only 1 crew out of 232 in the U.S. Army's 2nd Armored Division. A highly decorated and seasoned outfit, hailed by General George Patton as Hell on Wheels. The backbone of the American Armored Force is the M4 Sherman tank. Shermans at the time have a mixed reputation. Some veterans call them a godsend, but others describe them as a death trap. By the spring of 1945, the 2nd Armored is pushing deep into Nazi Germany. They had started their war against the Germans in North Africa in 1942, crushed them in Sicily in 43, and in 1944 pushed the enemy back across France and Belgium. Now tankers and infantrymen, closely supported by the fighter bombers of the Army Air Force, are rolling across German turf. Racing into Germany with the 2nd Armored was 21-year-old Don Evans.
Up till then, you know, it was all Allied country. People come out and cheered and stuff like that. Well, when you went into Germany, you saw the Germans, boy, and the looks you got, you know, like they're saying, you don't belong here. You're the enemy.
By now, it's clear that the Germans will lose the war, but they won't quit fighting. The constant threat of ambush is nerve-wracking for the tankers. One particular patrol remains a difficult memory for Evans.
And when the order come down the mountain up way, everybody starts growling and cussing and hollering, because nobody wants a right point. Nobody wants to be the first vehicle. So we're all unhappy.
Without warning, Evans' column is attacked.
I saw that big red flash out on the right side of the road. And when I saw that, I just dropped down, man, in behind the guns into the gunner's seat.
An explosion erupts inside the tank.
That thing went off and just filled that tank. It looked like the tank inside was, in that turret, was a cherry red. For a few seconds, you don't breathe. And then I hear the tank driver said, "I'm getting out of here." So he bailed out, and I jumped as far as I could get. And it just kind of felt like this right side of my face was going.
Evans has narrowly escaped the fiery blast of a rocket-propelled explosive called a Panzerfaust. German for tank fist. The Panzerfaust arms a soldier with the power to single-handedly destroy a tank.
The most gut-wrenching sight you can ever see is to pass a Sherman in a convoy where the bodies of the driver and the gunner were hanging out after the tank had been burned. Arms burned off to their elbows and their head gone, and that really is gruesome. If you could cry, you would, but it only infuriated you to the point where if you ever caught a German, you wouldn't let him live.
One German dropped the Panzerfaust on one of my track and killed 7 of my men. I was so upset about what he did that I was going to kill him. We decided at that point that we were savages when we were fighting it, and we became human beings when it quieted down.
All right, any minute, any second, guys, be ready, please.
In fury, director David Ayer recreates the terrifying intensity of a Panzerfaust ambush. An attack carried out not by seasoned German soldiers, but by a new enemy thrown against American tankers, school-age fighters of the Hitler Youth.
As Germany found itself being invaded on both fronts by the Russians and the Allied armies, they became increasingly desperate, and at this stage of the war, they basically consumed their own children, giving them weapons and sending them against the American tanks. It's just what those kind of societies do to themselves when they fall apart. People mean nothing. Children mean nothing. It's horrible.
The attack is a dangerous scene to capture, as technicians carefully rig a realistic Panzerfaust strike against the Sherman.
When you're shooting a scene and there's pyro, there's special effects, there's explosives, there's fire, it's dangerous work.
I'll give you an "and" explosion just to breathe that so you know when it's coming. And at this point here, this is the explosion point.
To ensure the scene is done safely, stunt coordinator Ben Cook reviews each element with the crew and cast.
Just making sure that all our systems are in place and that, everything runs smoothly.
Roll cameras. 3, 2, 1, action take.
The rocket strike is triggered remotely, right on cue.
The special effects blast looks good, but it doesn't look like it did any damage to the outside of the tank, which is correct, because the real power of the Panzerfaust is what happens inside the tank.
Das Panzernahbekämpfungsmittel, die Panzerfaust.
The Panzerfaust's warhead is known as a shaped charge. Inside, it's mostly hollow. The explosive material inside is formed around a copper cone. When the nose of the warhead hits a target, the explosive is ignited, and the cone shape concentrates the explosive energy onto a small point.
That molten jet just blasts right through the armor and sprays the inside of the troop compartment with red-hot molten metal fragments.
Keep it quiet.
To show what happens to a crewman inside the Sherman requires careful preparation by veteran stuntman Sean Button.
What I'm doing today, I'm just wearing one layer of Nomex on the bottom, and then I have a wet layer which is soaked in a fire-retardant gel. And then on top of that, I have the Sparko race suit, which is a 2 Nomex layer. So all up, I've got 4 layers, of which 3 dry, 1's wet, and then the costume over that.
A close-fitting and fire-retardant silicone mask will protect Sean's head and neck.
My concern as a director is anytime you do a burn on somebody and you suit them up in a fire suit, gel them up with flammables, light them on fire, they can't communicate.
2 tiny eye holes provide him limited visibility.
How many, Sean? 2. Oh, there you go.
Their actions are meant to portray fear and discomfort, so if something goes wrong, often you can't tell.
The dangerous stunt vividly demonstrates why World War II tankers so feared the Panzerfaust. Firefighters, stand ready.
3, 2, 1, action! On the right! Ah! Ah! Father!
Sean's good.
No, we had a good day. 4 times, repeated the action exactly the same every time, and we had a good day. Everyone was safe.
Now, the filmmakers are challenged with capturing the intense action taking place inside the cramped tanks. Months before Fury's actors could take their marks in front of a camera, a small army of technicians and artists began creating a convincing world, the battleground of armored warriors. The vehicle selected to portray Fury is a late-war version of the M4 Sherman. It belongs to the Tank Museum in Bovington, England.
The Sherman has character. You look at the German tanks, they're very cold, soulless, but there's something about the Sherman tank. There's a spirit to it, you know. It's a very American vehicle.
The M4 had a crew of 5, protected by armor up to 3 inches thick. It weighed about 30 tons and cruised along at nearly 30 miles per hour. It was reliable and relatively easy to maintain.
A real tank is a big steel cocoon, and it's crowded and it's cramped, and you can barely get the men inside, let alone cameras and lights. So we built a set. We built a tank interior, and it was one of those complex sets I think anybody had ever dealt with.
The tank interior had been built on a XYZ gimbal, which means it has movement in all those directions, with hydraulics that can move it suddenly, like it's been hit by a shell, or gently as it rolls over the top of an embankment or down a ditch. So the actors feel like they're really in that movement.
Action!
So the tank actually does everything that a real tank would do. And the turret rotates 360 degrees plus, the gun elevates, and they can also fire the gun as well. So we've replicated that.
Well, they're an exact copy of the real shell. When the man loads them into the gun, punches them in, these get pushed in on the gun. So when the shell ejects, it looks like they're empty, and a little bit of smoke comes out.
Cut!
The art department also fabricated a replica of the Fury on top of a modern, reliable tracked vehicle.
We cast a mold of the whole tank and made it out of fiberglass, and you literally couldn't tell the difference close up between each tank because every scratch, ding, and serial number was reproduced faithfully.
The platforms built around the hull of the replica Fury made it easier to film scenes on the move. The operator drove it from an exposed forward compartment. When the production required the real Fury, Michael Peña, who plays Gordo, took over the controls.
He has to drive this thing for the movie because his head's out of the hatch most of the time. And he really took to it. He really took to the vehicle. He got really good at whipping this cranky old machine around.
So basically, the steering is these two levers. This goes left, straight, right, straight. I only have view this way. My tank commander has a 360 view. He's the one guy that can see and control everything. You know, and he can say, you know, Gordo, speed up, light stick, light sit, whatever. But since he trusts me so much, I can almost predict what he's going to say because we've been fighting so long.
Of the approximately 13,000 men in an armored division, less than a quarter were actual tank crewmen. The rest filled the ranks of other units within the division, like artillery, medical, reconnaissance, maintenance, and the armored infantry. Often riding into battle, the armored infantry trained specifically to fight alongside the tanks. Without the protection of these foot soldiers, the tanks would be easy prey for enemy ambush.
We were taught a lot of things that other outfits weren't taught. We were told when you meet the enemy, you grab them by the nose and you kick them in the rear, is what Patton always said. So if you hit them and they're firing back at you, you find a way to get around them. Our job when we would dismount in a firefight would be to find out where the fire was coming from. Our tanks would be moving and maneuvering while we were out hunting for what's out there.
The infantry and the tanks worked as a team, providing support for each other. The tanks destroyed stubborn targets, while the infantry rooted out hidden threats.
One of the first jobs we had out there was to draw fire. They'll send out a few vehicles and hope that, you know, the enemy will fire upon you. And then you get to find out where the positions are. And you're tense all the time. Well, we were kind of scared, I'll tell you that.
In you go, boys. In you go, boys. Infantry, a little bit more haste.
In a scene influenced by veteran accounts, the tanks enter a German village. The armored infantrymen cautiously move along the flanks of the Shermans.
Each time you go into battle, it was always one of apprehension. I hope I see him first before he sees me.
It's just like going hunting. It's just another rabbit out there or a squirrel or whatever you're going to shoot at. This just happens to be a German. You get them or they get you.
Patton said, your job is to kill them bastards before they kill you. Unfortunately, it was in a position where that had to be done.
If the foot soldiers came under fire, the roles reversed, and the heavy tanks now protected the vulnerable ground pounders. It's a tactic accurately staged in the film as the GIs advance on an enemy position.
Nose on the ground, keep an eye out.
It was an integral part of the whole thing. I mean, we were meshed together like this, and we could put on a good show and a good fight.
Marco, hit that machine gun. Fire! On the line!
To stage a realistic matchup between rivals, the filmmakers would need to focus equal effort on the GI's toughest enemy, the Waffen SS.
You hear that? It's a goddamn SS battalion.
In the film Fury, as in historical accounts, the American tanker's most intense combat was often against the best trained and most diabolical German fighters, the Waffen SS.
By the time of this war, the German army was broken, and they're leaning on the political fanatics to keep the effort going. And They would send SS troops out there and put them in charge of regular Army troops. They're very experienced combat troops and had a reputation for not surrendering, fighting to the last man.
The Waffen-SS had begun as a paramilitary force of a few thousand in the 1930s, growing to nearly 1 million men at the height of the war. Swearing a personal allegiance to Adolf Hitler, they embraced their reputation as ruthless warriors.
The SS would put the Jewish people that they were moving to another camp, political prisoners and people they didn't like, they put them in this barn with the animals, lock it up and set it on fire. Just burn the people up.
We discovered we were fighting a different game altogether. It wasn't a chivalrous battle between knights and armor. It was now beast and animal going after it.
Any dirty trick they could pull on you, they would. They would give up, they would come out headed towards us, and some of our guys, not thinking, would run out to get them. And so it's when the guys would get out there, the front guy would fall down and he'd have a machine gun strapped on his back, and the two on each side of him would mow down the guys that come out to get him after they supposedly gave up. So we wouldn't take a prisoner after that. We said, don't try to give up, we're gonna kill you.
We were fighting SS, and I don't mind telling anybody this. If they knew the situation was absolutely hopeless and wanted to surrender, they'd wave a white flag. And our scouts would pull back, recon platoon would pull back, and the artillery would obliterate the area. And then the infantry and the army would go in, and if there's anything left, they would allow it to surrender. We never honored the white flag when it came to an SS unit.
I guess there was hardly a rule we didn't break. I guess it's the way you could put it.
Ein Baumspäher beobachtet das Unternehmen seiner Kameraden.
The Waffen-SS stood out in more ways than just their battlefield behavior. To distinguish themselves from other German army units and to underscore their perception as an elite force, the Waffen-SS created their own combat uniforms.
The German army employed artists that their full-time job was just to invent and draw new camouflage patterns. By the end of World War II, they had at least 35 different camouflage patterns. This is a German 44-dot camouflage tunic, and we went to great lengths to get this jacket right. We copied an original unissued one. We got it right because we used the correct linen-based herringbone fabric and on a very specific weave. And we took it to a printer and we meticulously mixed the inks until we eventually got it right after it had been dried and it went through its ovens and it had set into the fabric. You can see there's light knocked down on this.
There's an amazing amount of detail in these uniforms. It's a lot of little things, but even for somebody who doesn't understand what they're saying, when it's right, it all sort of snaps together, so that's what I'm after.
We wanted to show the SS how they truly looked to a modern audience. It's a very unique and different army than anyone's ever seen before.
The Waffen-SS also equipped themselves with some of the war's most advanced weapons, like the MG-42. A general-purpose machine gun, the MG-42 was far ahead of its time, with a barrel that could be changed quickly and an incredible rate of fire of nearly 1,500 rounds per minute.
The GIs nicknamed the weapon Hitler's buzzsaw because of its distinctive high rate of fire. It was thought to be so intimidating, Army had to do something, so they created a training film to bust the myth of the MG-42.
The German 42 on tripod. The German gun is good, but ours is better. When you know the drawbacks of these enemy weapons and realize that their bark is worse than their bite, you aren't afraid of some unknown thing.
But no training films could really diminish the effectiveness of the enemy weapon.
Marsch, Marsch! MG-Gruppe, Einstellung machen!
The Germans orientated most of their tactics around the machine gun because it was a battle-winning weapon.
Cock the weapon! Feuer frei!
To portray a realistic threat for the American tankers, instructors taught the film's cast members the historically accurate tactics of the Waffen-SS.
MG gunner, put the weapon into the shoulder, cock the weapon, and apply the safety catch. Alles klar? Alles klar. Fertig!
It wasn't easy to beat these people. If you replicate these people stupidly, you're not doing anyone any justice.
Marsch, Marsch! Stellung! Reverse right!
All right, come on 'em.
They're running, reverse left!
They're shooting those machine guns, and it's bouncing all around you.
Even to a tanker, safe behind a few inches of steel, the MG-42 still made a nerve-wracking impact.
You feel it hitting your tank. It's not going through, but just hear that stuff hitting on the outside. You know, that shakes you up.
Light them up! On white!
In the Columbia Pictures film Fury, 4 American M4 Sherman tanks pushed through the German countryside towards their next objective. And they roll right into an ambush.
Reverse, hard left, hard left! That was 98, it's a goddamn tank!
They've collided with their most feared adversary, the Panzerkampfwagen 6, better known as the Tiger.
It's kind of the monster in our movie, and it's a really important character in our movie.
This 56-ton beast started rolling off German assembly lines in 1942. It had a crew of 5, like the Sherman, but was nearly double the weight and size of its American counterpart. The Tiger's armor was 4 inches thick, an inch more than the Sherman. What the Tiger gained in protection, it sacrificed in speed. Its 700-horsepower Maybach gasoline engine gave it a top speed of just 23 miles per hour. Its real virtue was its gun, a massive 88-millimeter cannon that could punch a hole through 4 inches of armor over a mile away.
We were no match for them throughout the whole war. We were outgunned and out-armored.
We knew that they were a bigger and better tank than we were. In fact, they were twice our size.
One German gunner bragged that he knocked off 5 Sherman tanks at one crossroad.
The Tiger's 88-millimeter ammunition was nearly twice the size, with greater hitting power, compared to the Sherman's 75-millimeter ammo.
Our early 75-millimeter guns simply couldn't penetrate the armor on the forward parts of that Tiger tank.
These tankers questioned why a newer weapon, a more up-to-date weapon, wasn't on their tank. That came up more than once. Why don't we have a better tank?
In the first months of 1945, the Army finally delivered an answer. A Sherman loaded with upgrades, the M4A3E8. It's the version featured as Fury.
The Fury is the last evolution of the Sherman. It has thicker armor, has a better engine, has a bigger high-velocity gun, and it has an entirely different suspension system.
The most welcome improvement in the new Shermans was that bigger gun, firing a more powerful 76mm shell.
It was a high-velocity gun, which means it can go 3,000 feet a second. Now, the other one we had, the 75, had about 2,200 feet a second.
Could that increase of a few hundred feet per second in muzzle velocity level the playing field for the Sherman crews? Will a faster-moving projectile punch a hole in the Tiger's thick hide? At our firing range outside Phoenix, Arizona, a restored World War II M18 Hellcat takes aim at a target 100 yards downrange. A steel plate, 4 inches thick, the same thickness as the Tiger's armor. The M18 is armed with a 76mm gun, the same type of gun found on Fury. Although the new gun fires ammunition only a millimeter bigger in diameter than the 75's gun, the 76 ammunition packs nearly twice the propellant. And that moves the projectile at a much higher velocity, and that means greater hitting power. The armor-piercing shot punches right through the 4 inches of steel. The new 76mm gun finally gave Sherman crews the muscle they had been lacking.
Now, the Tiger's 88mm gun still had a greater range than the Sherman's gun, but if the Sherman could get in close and get off a shot at the right spot, the Sherman now had a fighting chance to knock out the Tiger.
Filming the clash between the two wartime rivals is expected to take a week. So the filmmakers built an accurate replica of a Tiger tank on top of a modern tracked vehicle, with running gear rugged enough to endure the rigorous shoot.
Our Tiger tank had a completely different wheel configuration to the real Tiger. So we put a blue skirt around the main body of our fabricated tank, and that would be for the special effects people to key off of and add the real Tiger tank tracks too.
Even without its proper computer-generated tracks, there is no mistaking the Tiger's intimidating presence.
This replica Tiger, it's working well. We've got it tracking from the end of the field up into the action area. And it's doing its job, although this clay soil is clogging up and it's making it a little bit tougher, but the tracks are working.
During the war, American factories built nearly 50,000 M4s. Although the Germans fielded thousands of other types of tanks, they only made about 1,300 Tigers. That's a ratio of about 50 Shermans for every 1 Tiger.
When you think about it, 1,300 Tigers, 50,000 Shermans. So you're going to flood the battlefield with Sherman tanks. It's always going to be 3, 4, 5 Shermans taking on that Tiger.
But simply throwing more Shermans into the fight and sacrificing more Sherman crews wasn't much of a strategy or much consolation for the men.
You end up with this situation that Sherman tanks are having to improvise. What is going to be our tactics when we meet enemy tanks? What's the tactics when we meet something bigger?
The Sherman is a bit faster than most German tanks, and the crews discover that in tank versus tank warfare, speed is life.
They kept on the move all the time. Mobility was the only thing that really kept the Shermans alive.
Another trick up the sleeve of the Sherman was its reliable powered turret traverse mechanism. It could complete a 360-degree rotation in about 15 seconds.
The Germans had a handicap because they couldn't turn their turret fast enough to get a bead on the Sherman as long as it was not coming at them dead on.
The Tiger had a powered turret as well, but it wasn't nearly as fast as the Shermans. In close quarter combat, those few seconds are the margin between life and death.
He's advancing, Tiger's backing up. Boom.
The differences between these two armored foes, their agility and the speed at which they can rotate their turrets, are exactly what the filmmakers draw upon as they choreograph the clash.
This is a setup.
There will be gunfire. Roll cameras.
Victor, 75 Charlie, take one. Aim marker. Action!
After the Tiger destroys one of the Shermans, the remaining M4s pull back to regroup. In a bold tactic described in veteran accounts, the Sherman's best chance was to charge their enemy. It's 3 little Davids versus 1 big Goliath. The nimble Shermans swarm the Tiger. The rivals jockey for a clear shot at each other. They push their tanks hard, racing to be the first to strike a fatal blow. Accurately staging the battle took the better part of a week. The replica Tiger had done an effective job as a stand-in for the real thing. Now, for the first time in 70 years, the Shermans will come face to face with their true enemy, a Tiger tank, the only working Tiger tank left in the world. German tanks like the Panzer Mark IV and the formidable Mark V held the advantage over the American Sherman for most of the war. It wasn't until improved Shermans reached the battlefield that the Americans even had a chance against the more powerful German armor like the Tiger. In the film Fury, director David Ayer recreates a tank battle in a way not seen since 1945.
David, very early on, was set on getting an actual Tiger into the movie, which has never been done on film before. People have built Tiger replicas, but nobody's ever photographed an actual working Tiger. I believe there's 6 in the world, and there's only 1 that actually runs. And the one that runs is with the Bovington Tank Museum here in the UK.
Tiger 131 is a very important tank. From our point of view at the museum, we wanted to make sure that it was going to be involved in a movie that would do it justice.
It's a special asset to be able to photograph in a film, and it helps lend to the reality of the movie. It's an honor to have it here.
It has an amazing presence. You only have to see this by the fact that as it's coming out on the set, everybody wants to have a closer look.
It was almost a mythical tank because it was so feared in the war and unstoppable. It sent chills down your spine to see this magnificent steel beast.
Tiger 131's long journey to the set began in April 1943 on a battlefield in Tunisia, North Africa. Tiger 131 clashed with a British tank unit. When one of the British rounds hit the Tiger's turret, it jammed it in place, forcing the Germans to abandon their tank. The British captured Tiger 131 intact. It was sent to England, where its strengths and weaknesses were carefully dissected, and then put on public display as a war trophy. Even Prime Minister Winston Churchill toured Tiger 131.
during the war, it stood as a symbol that they can be beaten, and the Germans can be beaten.
In 1951, the British military donated the Tiger to the Tank Museum in Bovington. Because of their careful attention, Tiger 131 is the only original Tiger tank in the world that still runs.
Understandably, there was some trepidation about, taking that asset off the lot and giving it to a film crew who they didn't know, and what were we going to do with it?
The museum wouldn't risk running the Tiger for more than one day. And to help further reduce the strain on the tank's running gear, the filmmakers built a path through the mud-choked field.
To help the museum feel more comfortable, we built a concrete track and a turning circle at the end. We also had on our team the two engineers that had rebuilt their engine. So they knew that if anything went wrong, they had the best guys in the world to fix anything that got damaged.
The art department developed a special spray coating that gave the tank an appropriate war-weary look, yet protected Tiger 131's original paint and markings.
Peels off very easily. We have to be really careful with what we put on this because it's the only one in the world that actually runs.
Never been in a movie before. Let's give her a whirl.
There's something about having the real vehicle that just makes this incredible battle scene of the movie, this tank-on-tank action we have, so much more real. It just really takes the authenticity of the film to the next level.
Its size and the power that it had, it really comes through on screen.
To see a Tiger tank side by side to a Sherman tank is to see how much bigger it was, a formidably superior weapon.
To get it out there helped my actors really sell the danger that they were in.
Moto now! Reverse! Reverse! Left stick! Bible, steady! Steady! Come on, Bible! Steady! Go there! Go there! Go there!
I don't want to jinx the next shot, of course, but the tank's running very smoothly, the engine sounds fantastic, and everything's going very well.
Even though the museum team carefully monitored the tank's performance, everyone recognized that at any moment, something could go wrong. Each new shot ran the risk of crippling the Tiger and grinding the production to a halt.
People's nerves lightened up as the day went on, and they realized this tank was much hardier than they thought.
In this cinematic duel to the death, only one steel titan will survive. But thankfully for the production crew and the museum curators, both of these armored warriors finished their workday a champion.
We are rolling! Action!
Tiger 131 delivered everything the filmmakers had hoped for. It wrapped up its work without a scratch and turned in a spectacular debut performance, living up to its reputation as an unstoppable monster.
For what we see, looks fantastic, especially when it interacts with a Sherman, but on camera it looks even better. I mean, we've amazing the technical effort that goes into this, looks very impressive, and we're very happy we've been involved.
To see the Tiger out in the field with camouflage, guns firing, doesn't get any better than that. And we'll never see anything like this again. Fantastic.
During World War II, the revered war correspondent Ernie Pyle witnessed a terrific tank battle. When he tried to describe what he had seen for his newspaper column, he wrote, "Probably only Hollywood, with its machinery of many dimensions, is capable of transferring to your senses a clear impression of a tank battle." The film Fury gives the impression that the Sherman was neither just a war winner, nor just a death trap, but an equal measure of both. How well it performed depended on the crews. Its real power wasn't in its steel hide or high-velocity gun, but in the men who went to war inside those 30-ton machines.
I'm hoping that when veterans see the film, that they can share it with somebody they know, and that person will understand a little bit better what they've experienced.
I've sometimes referred to them as the real superheroes. Hollywood comes up with all these action movies and superheroes, but these guys were real, and they were just ordinary guys who did extraordinary things.